Welcome to English Unplugged. My name is Breu, and I am a corporate trainer, and I also work with individual students in the Rhine-Main area. And my goal is to help people improve their confidence while speaking English. And today I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Nick.Ponter. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello, Britt. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Nick.Ponter. I'm a business English trainer in the area near Bielefeld in North Rhine-Westphalia. And like Britt, we have corporate clients, and our main aims are obviously reduce the fear of speaking, give people lots of confidence, have the vocabulary for the job, and lots of communication skills. And the onus really is on customized training. We live and breathe it.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. If it's not customized, it's not effective. That's how I feel about that. So this is our second episode of English Unplugged, Nick. Our first episode was on making small talk, big talk. Would you like to summarize that first episode for us today?
Yes, of course. We discussed that small talk actually doesn't sound as important as it is. So we decided to retitle it Big Talk. And the main takeaways, I would say, is that a lot of people say to both of us that they find this area the most difficult part of their communication. And we gave people some tricks and tips of building up vocabulary, subjects which you could talk about, that taboos shouldn't be taboos. And that's pretty much how we discussed Big Talk in our last session.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And we got some really positive feedback about that. So if you're interested in watching that episode, the link to that video will be in the description box below. You can check it out. We even made a really amazing handout to summarize our tips and tricks that we talked about. It was a really, really great talk. And I think we really emphasized the point of how important it is to use the opportunity to make small talk, big talk, because you can establish amazing connections with people through simple social interactions like that, right?
That is correct. Which leads us on nicely into our subject for today. Of course, to be able to do big talk, you need communication skills. Now, if you live, for example, in Germany or wherever you may be living in, and English is not your first language, and apart from attending good English courses with people like Britt and myself, how can you actually improve your language skills if you don't live in another country? What can you do yourself? And I think those are the questions we're looking at today. So, Britt, do you want to introduce the subject a little bit on how to improve your own English skills?
Right. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about everyday ways to improve your English skills. And it's a really fascinating subject because not everyone has the time or the opportunity to actually take English lessons with people like you or I. And if you are interested in working with us, obviously, you can find our contact information below. But we wanted to provide this talk to give people some inspiration how they can improve their language skills by acquiring the language. Okay, so before we look at our first tip, Nick, I just want to explain the concept of language acquisition, right? And when you acquire something, that means you make it yours, right? So if one company acquires another company, they then own the other company, as an example. So we, as language teachers, we focus on language acquisition, which means making a language your own. And it's really difficult to do this if you don't actually live in the country. So what we want to focus on are ways to improve your English by acquiring it. And the way to do that is to do it in ways that are enjoyable and experience-based. So we've got a few tips for you that combine all of the skills that we use while we're teaching English in our lessons, and reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we can improve every day.
Okay, that's a very good topics we got there to discuss today. I'm very often asked by people how you actually move on from what I call the translation phase, something like it's not a scientific term, but it's when you have to translate to speak. So maybe you think in German and okay, how do I say that in English? To move from that to speaking naturally without thinking. And I can certainly remember when I was learning German at the beginning, I translated everything. And after, I can't tell you how long it took, but after a while, it became more natural. Now, I had a huge advantage. I was already living in Germany. So I had the German language around me. I had a head start. It became natural much quicker. But if you don't have that advantage, then you have to do other things. So, first tip. Parents are not going to like this. Gaming. Some of the best English speakers I find in my lessons are gamers because they have a huge amount of practical experience in the English language through gaming worldwide. Generally, they're not scared of communicating at all, and they do it because they enjoy it. It's exactly what you picked up on, Britt. The other things as well is interacting generally online, social media, forums, maybe without Google Translate, try to do it naturally. So this is just our first tip, is obviously be on the move online. What do you think about gaming, which a lot of parents don't like that subject, Britt?
Well, as the mother of a 12-year-old little boy, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So, but what's really interesting about my son, who's just got his first gaming PC, and he's playing this quite popular online game, is that he's actually playing with kids from Germany and the UK and everybody who's kind of in this time zone. And it's fun, it's interactive, it's something that's really, really enjoyable. It's experiential, so it's very experience based. And that's how your brain wires neurons. So if you have all of those components, it's a perfect learning or language acquisition opportunity. And online forums, chat applications like Discord, amazing, because you have online communities that are interested in the same thing that you are interested in, and you have to be interested in it, and you have to enjoy doing it to do it willingly and to do it naturally. So I think gaming is a really great way to improve your English skills every day by doing something you have fun doing.
Yeah, and of course, that when you're online and you're chatting with people, it's a very quick world, and you haven't got time to put yourself in maybe your school environment, which is very much produce something which you're told to produce. This is on a much more natural level. And it's a very good way of, how do you say, language acquisition.
Exactly.
So that was our first number tip: gaming, be online. Britt, what about our second tip? Something to do with television, YouTube, I believe.
Yes, that's it. Our second tip today is obviously watching something on the television. So when native speakers say watch TV, it doesn't mean like linear cable or public network TV channels. Watching TV means watching something on a screen, right? So that could be YouTube, it could be Netflix, it could be whatever you have access to. And a lot of people I recommend this to in my lessons will say something to me like, oh, but I'm so exhausted when I get home. I'm so tired from work. I just want to turn on the TV and like zone out. And I totally get that because work is very exhausting and we all do want to relax. So it may seem difficult at the beginning. And if it is difficult at the beginning, we recommend watching something you've already seen in your native language, right? So whatever series you love, whether it's The Office or Big Bang Theory or Friends or whatever it is, Magnum PI, it depends on how old you are and which show you like to watch, right? You've seen it in your native language, you know the storyline. So watch it again in English. You can relax and just let the language roll over you. And that's a really, really great way to get started doing that. When you start feeling more comfortable with your listening abilities in English, then you can start to watch content that's new to you. So, and the one thing that we would definitely recommend is watching it in English, but also using English subtitles. And most platforms, right, Nick, have a subtitles option. I know YouTube has a subtitles option, and YouTube also has a playback speed setting. So if a particular video is going too fast for you, you can actually slow down the playback speed by 25%, so you can more easily follow that. I also recommend to my students that they should watch, if they're watching new content, they should watch something that is from their area of interest. So if you have a special hobby, like you like model trains, or you like interior decorating, or you like cooking, or woodworking, or something like that, triathlons, there's so many different things. Watch something that's enjoyable to you so that it's not like, oh, now I have to sit down and learn English, because that's not enjoyable. If
And
you're
it's not
what
really English learning, is it? I mean, it's not in the traditional sense of being in a training room, for example, that type of learning. It's a natural process, like you would pick up any language.
correct,
And fun.
just like we learned English as children, as our native
Yes.
language, and we learned it through different experiences. So that's why I feel like every attempt you make at improving English outside of a classroom situation, it has to be something that's experience based.
Mm.
So, and one really, really, really good example of how effective this can be is any of the Scandinavian countries. As you and I well know, living in Europe, the Scandinavians only have English language television with their language as subtitles. And most of them speak English brilliantly. Wouldn't you agree?
I completely agree. Now, of course, that's something which we don't have in Germany. The television is predominantly in German. However, with modern media today, for example, with Netflix and Prime, you can have subtitles on things we couldn't do in the past. You can quickly go back very, very easily and watch something again. A lot of people tell me that they don't watch it in English. They say they don't understand enough. And I say, yeah, okay, maybe at the beginning, but you have to fight your way through. And like everything in life, you can't just get on a bicycle and expect to cycle. You're going to fall off. And then you get back on again and try again until you can do it. And it's like swimming. And watching a film or maybe a series, an episode in English is exactly the same. And the more you do it, the better it gets. And it's not traditional learning, it's natural learning.
Correct. Correct.
And of course, you get to see your latest series quicker than you would in German.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. All right. Do you have any other input there on watching video or TV?
Well, I can remember when I go back to the end of the 1980s when I came to Germany, where we didn't have this internet-based television, and I picked up a lot of my German from watching German television because I didn't have any other choice. And I used to watch the roundup of the football, the soccer, at the end of the day. And at the beginning, it was all just one garble. And over months, I started hearing different words, and they started to separate. And nobody was teaching me German. I wouldn't say I learned to speak it, but a huge amount of vocabulary passively went into my head, so without realizing it.
Yeah, that's exactly how I learned how to speak German as well. And yeah, it's one of the best ways you can possibly do it.
Yeah.
All right. That that about does it for watching television. And that takes us on to our third tip.
Yes, it does. So we've discussed gaming, being online. We've discussed watching television. And now our third tip, listening, podcasts. It's similar to TV, of course, but this time you haven't got the visual, which helps you understand a lot of things because pictures tell you a lot. So pretty much the same tips are there as we had before. And again, you should choose something which you're interested in. You're not going to randomly listen to a podcast. So the big tips is listen through it. Choose something which you're interested in. Me personally, when I'm in English lessons, I like to recommend BBC. I'm not saying that because I'm British, but they have a very, very good library of thousands of podcasts on completely different subjects. And I think most people will find something there which they like. I personally like listening to the BBC News as a podcast on my way to work. So this is something you can definitely do. You can listen to your podcast when you drive around to work on a business trip. And sometimes you don't always have to actively listen. It can just be in the background, swimming around like music can be. What about you, Britt? Do you listen to podcasts?
Oh, I do. I'm a podcast junkie. And actually, I've been a talk radio junkie my whole life. So I would rather listen to the spoken word than to listen to music, but I do listen to music sometimes. But generally, when I'm driving in my car on my way to work, I've got a podcast going. And some of my favorites right now, I really like self-improvement and motivational talks. So one of my favorite podcasts at the moment is the Rich Roll podcast. And he is absolutely fascinating because he's a vegan ultra triathlete. And he's really great for psychological self-improvement, physical self-improvement, professional self-improvement, really, really great. Another podcast I really enjoy and I recommend to my business English students is the Diary of a CEO podcast. And this is hosted by a man named Stephen Bartlett. He's from England. And he was a contestant on the British TV show Dragon's Den, which is about entrepreneurs who showcase a product or a service to a group of very well-known shrewd investors. And I think different countries have a similar version of this. In the US, we call it Shark Tank, and in Germany, they call it the Lion's Den, something like that. But he's really brilliant because he has guests on that are motivational and talking about business development, but also personal development. So I really like that angle. And another good news outlet in the US is NPR, National Public Broadcasting. So depending on if you want a British accent or an American accent, those are two news outlets, BBC and NPR. But the other thing I can really recommend is if you are looking at an online newspaper or you're scrolling on your phone, most big news apps now have a listen option to the news stories. So you can have news stories read out to you. And for example, if you live in Germany, Deutsche Welle is one of the big names here in news broadcasting, and they actually have a weekly roundup of German and European news stories on their website in English. So for people who live in a particular country, look at what your big media outlet is in your country, and chances are they will have an English page or some kind of English content. So that's another tip that I can give there. I also really like podcasts because a lot of times the podcasters will upload transcripts of their podcasts. So you can either reread the transcript after you've listened. You can read the transcript while you're listening. Obviously, if you're driving in the car, you shouldn't be reading a transcript. We do not recommend that. But it really helps to reinforce a new vocabulary that you've heard while you were listening. But the main thing is listen to what interests you. And then the last thing that I could bring up and mention are TED Talks. And I think that's also motivational and inspirational. I love watching them, but they're really great in English lessons too, aren't they, Nick?
Exactly. I use TED Talks a lot in English lesson. They have a wonderful app as well, and a lot of the presentations are saved also as podcasts. So here we can combine nicely what you were saying about podcasts and the visual side as well. But to come back slightly before I go on to a little bit about podcasts, in our last recording which we did for Unplugged was on Big Talk. And one of the big tips we gave was building up your vocabulary. And what Britt was just saying about listening to BBC and Deutsche Welle and all of these other things is you naturally build up your vocabulary, which makes Big Talk easier.
That's right.
TED Talks, wonderful. It's a wonderful service. If anybody out there hasn't heard of it yet or used it, I can strongly recommend it. www.ted.com. There are very professional people presenting topics from A to Z, and there are transcripts there for you to download. The people are excellent presenters, public speakers. It's not death by PowerPoint at all. There are people who really can stand up on stage and speak. There are some well-known people and there are some unknown people. I use it a lot in lessons, and in particular, we use the transcript sometimes for reading through and for looking at unknown vocabulary. So it's an all-round learning experience. So it really is quite good, which leads us on to our fourth tip, and this is being active, extra active, super duper active, and that's writing. Maybe it's something we don't do as much as we did in the past. I mean, people used to write letters, and today I would say we communicate a lot more in little bursts. But anything which you do actively, and writing is one of them, like speaking, you're going to learn a lot because your brain must be used. However, be careful with online tools. It might be easy to suddenly use Google Translate or something like that, or deeper, excellent tools. I use it sometimes myself, but you're not going to learn. Using your brain, you really need to. So something which you can do is actively force yourself to write sometimes. If you haven't got anybody to write to, then just copy a text. It sounds boring, but copying it makes you think about the language structure, which you generally don't do when you're speaking. So if you have to write to somebody as well at work in a real email, maybe say to yourself, hey, let's not use the Google Translate. Let's try it myself, because you have to think about what you're doing. And the written word is different to the spoken word. Would you agree, Britt?
I would. I would. One way to really get your brain active is to read. And reading is invaluable, absolutely invaluable. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read. So a lot of my consumption is by listening, but actually engaging with the written word is very, very important. And another way, and this is our fifth tip, is to listen to audiobooks and to read books. Now, you can go back, like we said in our big talk video, reading and listening to books is one of the best ways to increase your vocabulary. It's enjoyable. It's fun. You can get lost in another world, and or you can also read nonfiction books about subjects that you find interesting, which I'm a nonfiction reader. I don't read a lot of fiction. Sometimes I do, but it's so nice to actually see a different side of the world. And sometimes it's, fantasy, and sometimes it's historical, and sometimes it's a mystery. And it's fun though, and it's relaxing and it's enjoyable. So the same tip here applies as with watching television or streaming platforms in your language. If you find it difficult, you should read a book that you've already read in your native language. So you don't have to focus so much on understanding everything so you understand the story of the book. You can really just focus on the language that's used. Now, I happen to know someone who is a published author, and he's here with me on this episode of English Unplugged. Nick, you're a published author. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, well, I'm the author of Connor Jackson and the Memory Thieves. It's a fantasy story. So you mentioned disappearing into the world of the unknown. Please feel free to disappear into there. And you also mentioned that reading and audio or listening is a wonderful way. Well, you could read this book, and I also recorded it. I'm the narrator for the audio book as well.
Yeah.
So I actually did both. And my second book will be published sometime in the next month. It's the sequel to this one. And I like to call it a comedy fantasy. The Age group is difficult to define. You have to define an age group, so it's defined as young adult fantasy. However, most of my readers are the people I know here in Germany or in the UK, and they're actually adults. And I think the oldest reader was up to 96, was the eldest reader. So although it's classified as young adult fantasy, anybody could pretty pick it up. There's no violence, there are no swear words. I've written it fairly traditionally, and everybody who's read it says it's a really good fun read,
Yeah.
with a nice dose of sarcasm in there as well.
Well, of course, of course. And I've read it and I think it's so much fun. And we're going to hear a little bit later at the close of the show. Um, what is your take on how reading can improve our English skills?
That is an excellent question. And it's a question which people ask me a lot in lessons. Say, Nick, can you recommend a book? It's very difficult because if you take somebody's language level at, let's say, B1, and they want to use a book for learning purposes, there are books on the market for learning, for example, A2, B1, B2. But I really think that most people in their normal life wouldn't read a book like that. I don't think they would be particularly interested in it. And you have to remember as well, when authors write books, they don't write books for people to learn a language from them. They are directed to native speakers, like watching a Netflix series. It's designed for native speakers. So it's, as Britt has said quite a few times today, read something which you enjoy.
Mhm.
And also a good tip, read something which you maybe have already read in your native language. The biggest tip I could say is, like when you're watching television, don't translate it. Just listen through and ignore the words you don't know. They may come out of context. Reading is exactly the same. You just read through and try to read it at a relatively good speed and don't stop at the words you don't know. Maybe you could have a review phase afterwards where you go back and have a look. But if you lose your flow, you will lose the interest, I believe. So you have to read it at a fairly quick speed. If you have tools like Kindle, you can actually click on the words, save them, and have a look at them later in the translation tools. So the biggest challenge you're going to find when you read something is if the list of unknown words is too high, that will restrict you. But language is a journey where you pick it up, and the more you do, the more you will learn.
Yeah, that's right. And I can only echo that from my personal language experience myself. I was a nanny in the first year that I lived in Germany. And so I would watch afternoon cartoons with the little girl that I took care of. And then I would watch the talk shows. And then I would watch the news program in the evening. But I also bought a copy of a pretty high level news magazine, and that was very difficult because it wasn't that fun. I wasn't really in a flow. It was a lot more enjoyable to watch or read something that was easy, where I didn't have to worry about everything. But I really like the format of ebooks. So
Mhm.
if you do have an e-reader, Kindle is, I think, the most popular, well-known one. Um, you do have the ability to get the definitions of words in while you're using the apps. And I actually teach 2 or 3 students where we don't use a textbook, we use Kindle books. And it's a really great way to targetedly look at language that is applicable to them and subjects that are applicable to them. We read mostly management books in English, and it is a really effective tool for learning.
Mm.
The focus was obviously everyday ways that you can improve your English. And so some of the general tips that we gave were don't translate, make it as natural as possible, speak as naturally as possible, but also while you are exposing yourself to the English language, you are acquiring it, you're making it yours, right? So some of the concrete methods that we talked about today were gaming and interacting on social media platforms or on community platforms like Discord or Reddit, something like that. We also talked about watching television, but in English, using English subtitles. We talked about podcasts and TED Talks. And we also talked about doing some writing. So not always relying on artificial intelligence. We have all these great tools now to engage our brains with the language. Other activities could be like cooking using an English language recipe, or following instructions on in an English language manual or something like that, where you actually have to think in English to fulfill a task. And then the last tip we gave was reading. And this is also something where you can actively engage your brain. But the main thing is in all of these tips that everyone does something that they are very interested in and that they love. So it doesn't feel like sitting down and learning, but actually naturally acquiring the language. So that's our summary for today. If you're interested in getting some more tips or working with myself, you can find my details below. I also put out a quarterly newsletter with tips and mini lessons in English. If you would like to work with Nick and his company, you can also find his contact details below in the description. And now we'd like to hear a little bit more about Connor Jackson and the Memory Thieves.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about Connor Jackson? Who is Connor Jackson?
Well, Connor Jackson is my protagonist. He's the gentleman on the front cover of the book there. A bit of a boring, nondescript kind of person who gets involved in one of the craziest adventures you could ever imagine. Of course, if you go into a bookshop or buy a book online, the first thing you're going to do is read the brief description on the back. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. So rather than me telling you, I'll read you what it's all about. So Connor Jackson lives a quiet life in Lower Molehampton. He lives in the house he was born and brought up in, and apart from his secretive job as a civil servant, he pretty much lives an ordinary life. That is, until one morning when Connor is woken up by something, so he decides to investigate. He notices a massive molehill in the middle of his back garden. Now, molehills have always been a feature in Lower Molehampton, but there appear to be more than ever now, and this one is huge. Upon closer inspection of this mountain molehill, which has appeared during the night, Connor discovers a glass jar sitting in the centre of the mound. Thinking nothing more than this being a rather strange occurrence, Connor hides the jar away and forgets about it altogether. Now I've lost where I am. There we are. That is until a few months later, when late one evening Connor is ambushed in his home by two sets of intruders. Attempting to flee, he is eventually captured. Fearing for his life and not knowing what these kidnappers want, Connor is thrown into a world which he never would have expected, into a world where he discovers the truth about life.
The truth about life.
And
I've always wanted to know what that is.
So that's the blurb on the back of the bit. So Connor Jackson, the protagonist, gets involved in a very, very strange story. The book involves moles, these annoying little creatures which leave molehills in our garden. But did you know there's a secret world below the ground with discos and shops, and they spy on us? Yes, moles are crafty little beasts and devils. And Connor Jackson goes into the mole world below the ground. He knows things which we never know.
I was just wondering, most people think moles are blind. They are blind, aren't they?
Of course they're not.
No?
No, of course they're not. How would they be able to spy on us?
Right, exactly.
Britt, now, in your household, when somebody does the laundry and you put, let's say, 20 socks in the washing machine, do you get 20 back?
No.
The moles, the answer lies with the moles. And the answer lies in this book.
It's the answer to life. It's the answer I have always wanted. Always wanted. Now, tell us a little bit about what was your inspiration for this book? How did you come up with the character Connor Jackson, and why moles?
I had never had the intention or motivation to write a book before. It's something that maybe people dream of for years. But one evening I was sitting in my back garden about, 8-9 years ago, and my garden was destroyed by molehills. And I thought to myself, there must be a city below the ground. And I thought, that would make a funny story. And then I said to myself, I'm going to write a book. And I started, it took me about, I would say, a year to plan it out until I actually started the writing. But the process was really good fun. And I learned a lot about myself in the process. Number one, I never knew I was creative in this context. I never knew I had stories inside me. I never knew I could really write apart from business emails. And something else I learned once I actually won a contract for publishing, I didn't know I could narrate. I didn't know I could sit in front of people and read my story to them, which I have to say, as a storyteller, is the nicest part of the whole process. So I've done a lot of live readings, a heck of a lot, over the last years, and it's something. And I recorded my own Audible audio book as well for Audible.
Wow, it's just so amazing. It's so amazing how a little idea like that could take your life into a completely different direction.
And
Yeah,
learn things I never knew about myself, which is really
yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah, yeah. Well, I thoroughly enjoy listening to you read. I think you have a wonderful voice, and the story is just so charming and so sweet. And so I love it. I love it. And my son has also really enjoyed it too.
Thank
So
you.
you do live readings, you said. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it started in the pandemic where I lost my audiences in the local area. So I started reading and offering readings to people I found online. And, it had a bit of a domino effect. And over the last years, I've read, I come in live on screen. I've read to school classes in India, Pakistan, Canada, South Africa. I've pretty much read around the world. And I've also read to institutions in Germany as well. I read live in a couple of companies as well. So if anybody out there would like a very, very, I have to say, it's rather entertaining reading, feel free to contact me. And whether it's to a private audience at home, whether it be to a school class where your children are in, or a reading group, feel free to contact me and I can offer you a very entertaining session.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, your live readings really are very, very entertaining. So if people would like to contact you, what's the best way?
Well, at the end of the show, we'll have our email addresses at the bottom, and the best way is contact me directly on that or through social media. I'm actively contactable on all channels, and I do reply to everyone.
Wonderful. Okay, so all of our contact information is at the bottom in the description box and the show notes. Thank you, Nick, for taking time with me to do another episode of English Unplugged and to introduce and present your book to us. Our next episode is in the pipeline. We're talking about pronunciation, I believe.
Exactly. It's a slightly different subject than the ones we discussed, but yes, sometimes in the next weeks we will be producing that. And don't worry, we're not going to go back to school and get everyone to speak with a typical British accent. That is not our motivation for it. But you'll have to tune in and find out what our motivation is.
Wonderful. All right,
Thank you very
Nick.
much, Britt, for today as well, for working with you. It was really nice and a very nice conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.
Bye bye, everyone.